It started.
Hello and welcome, students, to the very first session of VV 2021. So I hope you're all settled and have no problem on the technical front. So if you face any problems regarding the Zoom classroom, you can please write in the chat and we will try to address that. Okay. So this is the first lecture in the course on quantum mechanics, which will be the instructor is Professor Arvind Kumar, and there are 3 tutors who you will also meet during the tutorials. So Professor Arvind Kumar is a former center director of the Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education, and he has been he's a very experienced teacher as well. He has taught for many years at the Mumbai University, and then at various different places, also at the Homi Bhabha Center, and then the Center for Excellence in Basic Sciences, CBS Mumbai. So Professor Kumar does not need much introduction. He is very well known in the physics community, also as a physics education researcher. He has a very large number of publications in PER, and you will also hear a talk on PER from him on the third week of the program. But now in the first 10 days, he will be giving these lectures on quantum mechanics. And so I welcome Professor Kumar. Yeah, I also should mention that Professor Kumar is also the recipient of the Padma Shri Award. So for his contribution to science education and science education research in the country. So without further ado, I invite Professor Kumar to begin his course.
Okay, thank you, Professor Manvesh. I hope you can all see my slide.
Professor Kumar, there is some window which has come in the middle of the thing. It says, please move this window away from the shared application. Can you see it?
I can see it, but what to do about it?
What you can do is that you can just stop sharing and share again. Maybe that will make it go away easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fine now.
Okay, so on my own behalf, I would like to welcome all the participants of Vigyan Vidushi 2021. Of course, I'm going to discuss quantum mechanics, which is a basic course for advanced physics. And my first lecture will be kind of overview of classical formalism and why the classical formalism had to be replaced by a new theory. So that is the way I'm going to do this talk. Let's begin with
Professor Kumar, sorry to interrupt. That window is again there. So can you move that window away? Just drag it, click on and drag it. I don't know what window it is, but do you have anything else?
No, there is nothing else. I don't know how to drag.
Was there an alert regarding the recording, which maybe that is the one? I don't know.
I have no idea how to get out of this. We can try my other computer on which.
No, it will not. It's not a matter of the computer. Can you click on it and drag it away? Try to do that.
Just happened because the mouse is.
Because it's blocking part of the screen. So.
Yeah, I can see that, but I don't know what to do about it. I just clicked twice, so it's coming again and again.
No, maybe you can again stop sharing and then look at it on the desktop if there is any window, and then close that.
So now share again, right?
No, before that, do you see any window on your desktop which you can close?
Other than this video.
Other than this video.
No, I mean, there is a post attendee Zoom. I mean, what?
No, that's other than that, there is anything on your desktop or no?
No, Skype and no, there are various other applications on my.
No, any window on that? No.
I don't see any.
Okay. There was a pop-up message saying that this is being recorded. Did you click on that and got it, or you did not click? Maybe that is what is popping up.
Recording. So should I click on that?
No. When you opened, there was an alert message saying that this meeting is being recorded. Did you?
Yeah. So I
said
continue. I said continue.
Okay, fine. Then let's try once more. Maybe you try sharing it once more, and then we'll.
Yeah, so now I see my desktop, as you probably can also see.
No, we can't. We have not. You have not shared the screen yet.
Okay, I share now. Perhaps now it is.
Now it's not there. At least for the moment, it's not there. So let's continue, and if it comes back, we'll see.
Yeah, but now I'm not able to move the slide.
Yeah, it has moved now. Yeah.
Okay. I think now it's not coming, right?
No, at least not yet.
Not yet.
Let's continue.
Okay, so have all the students been admitted? So I again.
Yeah, students are all there. You can continue.
So welcome everybody, and let me start. We have spent a few minutes on this technical part. So let me begin with quantum mechanics, and I'm first going to review the classical formalism, which you all have probably learned in separate courses. But just to set a background to this lecture, I'll review it very briefly. Then I'll come to the question of why classical physics fails in the atomic domain, and then some old quantum theoretic attempts to fix the problem of classical physics, which of course was not very successful. And then before the modern quantum mechanics was discovered around 1925 or so. So, and I'll give you references and acknowledgement. And so let me begin with the review of classical formalism. Now, classical physics, as you all know, I mean, what was the classical view? We are talking here very generally. I mean, how did it look at the world? And it looked at the world in terms of two basic categories, matter and field. Matter, as you all know, is some kind of localized entity with volume and mass. And it always has finite degrees of freedom. No matter how many number of particles there, it may be a very large number, a very little number of particles. Ultimately, it's discrete. The number of degrees of freedom is finite. It may be very large. And its basic constituent, matter, is built out of what we call particle, which you may regard as something, an entity of zero size, of course, at the scale of interest, but it has some mass, and those particles of matter satisfy Newton's law of motion. In contrast, field is an extended continuous entity. And the word continuous is very important, because if it is to be described by a continuous function, then it has to be, the values have to be given at every point of space, and therefore there are infinite number of degrees of freedom. So whereas these discrete bodies have finite degrees of freedom, field has infinite degrees of freedom. Of course, we can still have some intrinsic degrees of freedom besides these infinite degrees of freedom. You may need one field or three fields like vector fields or tensor fields, etc. And sometimes the word wave is also used if the field is time dependent, etc. We often use the word wave. At the time of pre-Einstein physics, the only known dynamical field at the beginning of 20th century was electromagnetic field that satisfied Maxwell's equations. Newton's law of gravitation involved action at a distance. It actually did not require a dynamical gravitational field. Excuse me, though a static field could be postulated for convenience. So we do postulate gravitational field even in Newtonian physics, but that's a static field. Whereas the electromagnetic field that satisfied Maxwell's equations were dynamical fields, space-time dependent and governed by Maxwell's equations. Now, as you know, in 1905, there was an upheaval in physics due to Einstein's special relativity. Our basic intuitive ideas of space and time underwent dramatic changes, and however, the Maxwell's equations remained unchanged. Actually, you can say special relativity arose out of Maxwell's equation. But Newtonian mechanics was not consistent with special relativity, so it got modified. And furthermore, the Newton's law of gravitation, it had to be revised because it was based on action at a distance. And the relativistic theory of gravitational field, and Einstein and others tried to put gravitational field in the framework of special relativity, but they did not succeed. And it's one of the most important achievements of physics that Einstein, to relativize gravity, he arrived at the so-called general theory of relativity. Of course, we will not be concerned with it. But regarding fields, we should know this thing, that the electromagnetic field was the only field in the beginning. And then because of Einstein's theory, there came in physics a dynamical gravitational field also. However, relativity, though I have mentioned, that's first of all not a part of this course. And secondly, it does not affect the basic tenets and programs of classical physics. In particular, it does not change how we describe the state of a system. So therefore, relativity is now taken to be part of classical physics. You can have a pre-Einstein classical physics, that is Newtonian physics, and post-Einstein classical physics, that is relativistic mechanics and relativistic field theory, etc. The number of independent variables needed to specify a system. Now, I'm going to introduce some terms which I'm sure you are familiar with. The degrees of freedom is the number of independent variables. And as you know, in particle, in ordinary three-dimensional space needs three variables. They could be Cartesian, spherical, polar, etc. And an n-particle system needs three n variables. If there are k constraints, you reduce that number, you call it small n, and we can imagine an n-dimensional space. And this space is called configuration space. However, configuration space is not as important as the next that I'm going to say. The dynamical state of a system is not, specifying just coordinates of a particle in space is not enough for Newton's second law. To determine the path of a particle, we need to specify its velocity or momentum. So that means six. We need six quantities, not three. And so if you have an n number of degrees of freedom, you actually need two n independent quantities to specify the dynamical state of the system. And of course, these need not be positions and velocities. The classical formalism is much general and it gives you a lot of freedom. In fact, complete freedom in the choice of n independent variables, which are called generalized coordinates. The dynamical state of a system of n degrees of freedom, it is described by q's and q dots. They're called generalized velocity or generalized momenta. You must have done in your classical physics course. I'm going to define it later. And this q's and p space, the 2n dimensional space, that is called the phase space. And dynamical state of the system is represented a point in this space. And as the state changes with time, this point traces a trajectory in phase space. And given the values of q and pi, that is all these values at one instant, the laws of physics then determine these q's and p's at all other instants. That means they determine the entire trajectory in the phase space. We first restrict to discrete degrees of freedom, and then in the slide later I'll come to fields. So Newtonian formulation, you're all familiar. It's just written for completeness. The mass into acceleration is external force. It's for any n particle system. So for any ith particle, you have to write that anything due to external environment and due to the internal forces of the rest of the particles, etc. And of course, these laws are true in inertial frames, in which Newton's first law is correct. And if you go to the non-inertial frame, then you have to add pseudo forces. I think you all know that very well from your earlier BSc courses and so on. But a more convenient formulation, which is much more general, much more elegant, and not only elegant, it's a stepping stone to quantum mechanics, is the so-called Lagrangian and Hamiltonian formulation. I'm going to give a very cursory 2-page summary, and it's not going to do just proper justification to this very important subject of classical analytical mechanics. And you need to, I'm sure you know about this great book, Goldstein's Classical Mechanics. So you need to look if you want to see these statements properly, then you need to look at this book. But just as a summary, a Lagrangian formulation and particle system is a function of the generalized coordinates, generalized velocities, etc. And once again, I repeat that Q's, of course, can be Cartesian coordinates, but the formalism has much freedom, and they are not necessarily, they may not even have dimensions of positions. And the system is described by a Lagrangian function, and there is a variational principle. So it's an alternative formulation, which is of course equivalent to Newtonian formulation. The formulation is that there is a Lagrangian to which we subject a variational principle. That is, if you vary the Lagrangian around the actual path with endpoints fixed, that's an important condition, then mathematics of calculus of variation gives you these things which you have definitely done in Goldstein's book or any other equivalent book. So these are the Euler-Lagrange equations. Just note there are n equations for each Qi, and this is a second order equation. So as you would know, in a differential equation of second order, you need two quantities. So there will be 2n quantities that you need. And of course, L is T minus V if the system is non-relativistic, and L is kinetic energy minus potential energy. The Hamiltonian formulation is even more suitable for both are. I mean, Lagrangian formulation is important for classical fields, and Hamiltonian formulation is important for both. And you define the generalized momenta. These are called generalized. They will reduce to the usual things. If you use Qi as position coordinates and as L T minus V and T as half mv square, if you use, then it will become the usual momenta. But this is much more general. These need not be position coordinates. I mean, these need not be, these are generalized velocities, and you have a derivative of L with respect to this, and you have this generalized momenta, and the Hamiltonian is defined, as you know, by this. And then you get the equivalent to Lagrangian formulation, these equations, which you use Lagrange equations, and you will be able to get these equations. And for conservative systems, H is equal to total energy. These are, once again, we should match how many constants are needed. So here there are 2n equations for each I, and naturally these are first order equations, so you need just 2n constants. So once again, the number of constants required matches everywhere. So this is the thing. There are many ifs and buts about these statements, that where H is T plus V, whether it's total energy, is it conserved, is it total energy always, etc. There are many subtle points, but we don't have time to go into those things. This is just a quick, brief review of the formalism, which we will be using in the quantum course. Now, just one slide on this big subject, classical field theory. EM field, as I have already told you, governed by Maxwell's equation. But in general, once again repeat, a field has continuous infinite degrees of freedom. And this formalism that I wrote was for discrete. I was equal to 1 to n, but you have to suitably modify the formalism because it's infinite degrees of freedom, and it has to be adapted. And you'd probably know that whenever in physics you talk of continuum, the important things are densities rather than the total integrated quantity. So we work in terms of Lagrangian density, integrals are Lagrangian, space integrals are Lagrangian, Hamiltonian, etc. We need not get into this too much. Only as a caution, do not think this T minus V is everywhere true. Even in relativistic classical mechanics is not true. And for classical fields, you have to get it either through some approach from discrete to continuum, or you have to guess it in such a manner that the Euler-Lagrange equations are the desired field equations. So for example, for Maxwell's equation, there will be which is a continuum case, there will be a certain Lagrangian density, and it will give you whose Euler-Lagrange equations will give you the Maxwell's equations. Anyway, this was, I'm afraid, very, very quick summary of a very, very elegant subject, but that is enough for our purpose here. And just last few remarks. First of all, that classical physics has what is known as determinism. That means, given the initial state, the state of a classical system is determined at any other time. There's no element of chance in dynamics. So this will be contrasted with quantum mechanics shortly. So classical physics is characterized by what is known as determinism. It's a deterministic philosophy. And of course, you have heard of probabilities even in classical physics. You have seen in kinetic theory and statistical mechanics. It's needed because it's impractical to, when the number of degrees of freedom is huge, Avogadro's number of, it's impractical to specify initial state and track each particle. So by necessity, you have to introduce probability notion, but that is a practical necessity. It's not a fundamental aspect of nature in classical view. And one important assumption of classical physics is that the state can be specified by perfectly precise values of its dynamical variables. Measurement, of course, disturbs the system, no doubt. But the classical view is that this disturbance can be made as small as you like. The error range can be made as small as you like by increasingly refined techniques. Now, as you will see, it is exactly this point which QM rejects in its formalism. So with this, classical physics thing is over. I would like to pause here for any questions here, but I must say that the object of this course is not classical physics. So if you have any problems, do ask me on the chat, or the academic coordinator again get questions on the chat. And
yes, Professor Kumar, there are a couple of questions. So the first question is that what is the importance of phase space? And the related question I will say at the same time is, we know that the dimension of phase space is 2n. What is the dimension of the configuration space? Just n?
Just n, yeah. So answer to the first question, what is the importance of phase space? I've already told you that it is in the phase space that there is a complete information about the state of the system. A point in the phase space, if you give the coordinates of that point in phase space, then Newton's equations or Hamilton's equations, they determine the entire trajectory. If you give a point in configuration space, okay, you know the coordinates of the point, but it doesn't help. That's why for classical dynamics, it's not configuration space, it is phase space which is most important. And the phase space trajectories is the information that classical physics gives. Classical determinism means, given a point in phase space, the entire phase space trajectory is determined. So that's the importance of phase space. What was the next question? Yeah, that of course is true. Configuration space is n-dimensional and phase space is 2n-dimensional. Anything else?
Yes, there are a few questions on Lagrangian and Hamiltonian. So
yeah.
First of all,
yeah.
Shall I ask them?
If I could interrupt you, Anvesh, because if there are any technical questions on this, I will answer it in the chat, because the purpose of today's lecture is not at all in going into the technicalities of classical physics. Please do ask questions. I will answer them in the thing, because otherwise it will completely go, we will go astray. Our purpose is something different. This whole idea of classical physics was just to set the background, and we are going to come to it when we come to Dirac formalism, etc., and quantum mechanics. All this, whatever I have done, we'll come back to it. But please do ask questions, even technical questions on classical physics in the chat.
Yeah,
I'll answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Now,
there's just a follow-up question. Also, we read that phase space is 6-dimensional space. Phase
space is 6-dimensional for one particle. But if there are n particles, then it will be 2 into capital N if there are no constraints. So 6-dimensional only refers to one particle. So it's not correct to say 6-dimensional. Phase space is 6-dimensional, one particle. Phase space will be 2 into capital N for n particles. But if there are constraints, you have to subtract them out, etc. Okay. Now, before I go ahead, I'm now going to say that classical physics fails in the atomic domain. And I think all of you students have read these things, right? All the way from your higher secondary to BSc, modern physics, etc. And I want to request the coordinator to see if some people can already anticipate what I'm going to do and what kind of difficulties classical physics faced in atomic domain. I'm of course going to summarize, but I want some anticipated answers to this question. Can I have some?
Sure. You want the students to write on the chat? So
if you can unmute it, I would like to listen, but if, whatever you prefer. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I just want some inputs.
Yeah. So can you just again state your questions? Maybe some of the students missed it. So just can you just state your question once more?
The question is, what were the features or experimental features results in atomic domain question classical physics that pointed to the need to replace classical physics by some new theory? What was the need? So need for abandoning classical physics in the atomic domain. What were the experiments, etc., and their inferences?
It says photoelectric effect.
Yeah, somebody is saying photoelectric effect.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. That's the kind of thing. What about photoelectric effect?
So the variation of photo current with intensity and frequency.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Any other thing? Any other input?
So there was also the experiment with Young's double slit experiment, in which we blocked one of the slits, and then we reduced the intensity so much that only one electron passed at a time.
Yeah.
So
very good, very good. That is, you are talking about.
What we expected to see was not what we actually saw.
That is
duality, sir,
duality experiment that we're talking about. We are going to do it in great detail in the next lecture. Yeah, that also, at least initially it was a thought experiment. Any other input? I'll just wait.
Yes,
for
there are.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next, yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. There is also blackbody radiation.
Very good. I was expecting that. I think that
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Started with blackbody.
There are many people on YouTube chat who have also written blackbody radiation.
Yeah.
Some have written also Rutherford electron scattering experiment. Somebody has written Raman effect. Somebody has written wave particle dual nature of light, ultraviolet catastrophe, Compton effect. These are Stern-Gerlach experiments. Yeah. These are all answers written on the YouTube chat.
This is excellent. I think so. You already know what I'm going to say. So it's going to be very easy for me. I'll go through hurriedly, and various things of the various responses. They were excellent. Compton effect. Raman effect, of course, came too much later, which by that time quantum mechanics, but it is perfectly correct that Raman effect needs quantization of molecules, etc., molecular energies. And Compton effect, of course, is a very, very important input that you people have given. Photoelectric effect. And one response I would just like to comment that the Rutherford's model by itself, of course, pointed to the need for a new theory, because Rutherford's model had an orbiting electron, and the electron, accelerated electron must radiate charge. So the instability of Rutherford atom was, so it was a right answer, absolutely right. So if you permit me now, I'll go to the slide. I think
Please go ahead.
I would have liked to have much longer discussion on this, but time doesn't permit me. So let me go to the next point now. So I'm repeating what all the students have said. At the end of the 19th century, classical physics was a very successful theory. But soon the atomic domain revealed features, and first was a dual nature of light and matter. This was already pointed out by many students. Light shows interference and diffractions, which clearly show it's a wave, and polarization establishes the transverse nature. However, when light interacts with matter as in photoelectric effect, it behaves like a stream of particles. And I think it was already pointed out that the maximum energy of emitted electron, these were the experimental features. It was independent of intensity, and below a threshold frequency, there was no emission. So these were two features which are very puzzling. Independence of intensity, no matter how intense is the beam, it does not change the maximum energy of the electrons coming out. And also there is a characteristic frequency below which no matter how intense is the beam, you just can't have photoelectric effect. These are impossible to understand in the classical picture, because in the classical picture, the energy is distributed over wavefront and it depends on the intensity. So if you increase intensity, it should come out. So why doesn't it come out? So it was a striking failure of classical view. And Einstein very simply, in a very brilliant but simple answer, Einstein, and of course he was guided by the earlier ideas of photon from Planck's problem with black body radiation, that the maximum basically photoelectric effect is an electron-photon collision. It's a one particle collision. And if that photon has enough energy, only then it can knock out an electron. So it doesn't help if you have large number of electrons. If you have photons, if you have large number of photons, you have a greater intensity. But if each one of them doesn't have enough energy, what can it do? I mean, it will not cause. So that's the answer, you all know. And of course, as somebody pointed out, Compton effect further confirmed. Compton effect, in fact, was the final thing at the time of Einstein. See, many people were still, because they were so impressed by classical physics, they were refusing to still think that light consists of photons. But Compton effect finally sort of went in favor of the photon picture, because it not only said photon has an energy, which Einstein said, but most importantly, it has a directed momentum h nu by c in the particular direction. And photon Compton setting was just electron-photon collision, as usual, two billiard ball collision, and everything worked out. So what more could one want? And observations of scattering of Compton confirmed all this. So this is one problem, that light is showing. Similarly, atomic particles show a dual behavior. Electrons behave like particles moving on trajectories. You could, in cloud chamber tracks, etc., you see tracks and they seem to behave like particles. But if they have suitable energy, they show diffraction effects. Even other particles show diffraction effects. Now, this is an impossibility for particles to show diffraction effect. Is completely against classical physics. Classical physics, diffraction is explained by wave picture. After all, Newton's corpuscular theory, despite the brilliance of Newton, could not explain diffraction, although he tried a lot, but he could not explain in terms of particles. Here there are electrons, which we think are particles, but they are showing diffraction effect. So it was a blow to the idea that electrons are particles. And these observations, before these experiments, actually, a theorist called de Broglie, a French, in his PhD thesis, he proposed this, that the wavelength is h by p with a particle. And basically his argument was, if photons can behave like particles, electrons could behave like waves. And from the relations for photon, he arrived at this thing. We'll go to do it next time in more detail. So the crux of the matter is matter and radiation both are sometimes particle-like and sometimes. And there is no way classical physics can handle this puzzling wave-particle duality. Now, another important feature was that a classical particle, whether bound by some potential or this, it is always continuous energies. But bound states in atomic domain have only quantized or discrete energies possible. So, and this is inferred from several observations, which some of you probably said, discrete energy losses. If you have electrons impinging on atoms, and atoms, if they had continuous energies, then you will have continuous energy loss. But very strikingly in Frankfurt's experiment, you have energy losses which are discrete. That means if a 50 electron volt beam is impinging on an atom, then suddenly the scattered electrons will be either, let's say, about 40 eV or 45 eV or something like that. It won't be continuous energy loss. And this is a striking, I think, the most direct evidence of energy quantization of atoms. But of course, there was another thing which in fact Einstein and Debye actually explained much earlier than these experiments, and that is the specific heats of classical physics had a equipartition theorem explained specific heats very well, but it could not explain its low temperature behavior, because a very strange thing happens at low temperatures. Some degrees of freedom get frozen out. And as some people have said, in fact, this could have led to quantum mechanics instead of black body radiation. Historically, it was black body radiation, which is a very complicated problem, which I'm not going to do it in this course because it's a problem of classical statistical mechanics, quantum mechanics, statistics, etc., etc. So historical history, of course, doesn't care whether it's pedagogically simple to understand it or not. That's the way it happened in history. That the failure of classical physics was apparent in black body radiation. But from the point of view of understanding particle quantum mechanics, it is not a good starting point. But this is a very good starting point, the specific heat behavior, because it seems that the atoms suddenly lose their degrees of freedom. Now, how can this happen? If a molecule is vibrating, why does it lose its vibration? It is obvious that the energies are discrete, and then the motion is not enough. The thermal energy is not enough to excite those things. So these are the points for this. And all these points very clearly show that there is quantization of energy states of atoms. Next, of course, gaseous atoms show discrete line spectra. That also shows, and as Bohr explained it properly, and somebody very nicely quoted the Stern-Gerlach experiment. Please read it yourself. You I'm sure read it in your BSc. Stern-Gerlach experiment was some kind of atoms with some magnetic moment. They were allowed to go through inhomogeneous magnetic fields, and the experiment, classically you would expect a continuous patch, but you got two dots showing that the angular momentum is quantized. Please remember, it is about magnetic moment, but magnetic moment is proportional to angular momentum in electrodynamics. So that's why it's angular momentum. Now I must say, it is not that discreteness never happens in classical physics. It does happen. We have all learned in our higher secondaries there are stationary waves and they have discrete wavelengths. I'm sure you remember harmonics of sound waves in closed cylinders and with one cylinder, both ends open, or one end open, all sorts of things. Or strings, they have stationary waves. But why were people not worried about that discreteness? Because that's because of these boundary conditions, and that does not imply discreteness of energy, because the amplitude of the wave is not constrained. So sound wave in a certain environment, its frequencies may be discrete, but it doesn't mean sound wave intensity will be discrete. No, because the amplitude of sound wave or amplitude of string oscillation can be anything. It's unconstrained. So therefore, it was not a problem at all, and it did not raise anybody's eyebrows. But in quantum mechanics, what happens, the wavelength of electron wave, when the same sort of thing happens for electron wave, once again, there is a problem, because the wavelength of electron wave, because of this wave particle duality, is related to the momentum and hence the energy of the electron. So you see the points that whereas in classical physics, wavelength discreteness was not a problem because it didn't affect energies of the waves. In quantum mechanics, if you have discrete wavelengths, then it is a problem because discrete wavelengths will correspond to discrete energies. So this suggests that quantization of bound state arises because of the wave nature of electron, And because these may be stationary and they may have, because of certain boundary conditions, they may be discrete wavelengths. And so this is, of course, a hunch. This is not a full theory. And as we will see later in this course, QM theory puts this simple hunch on a more rigorous footing. The QM formalism will take care of all these sort of intuitive points. The last point classical physics explain is the most ubiquitous, most thing that every theory should be able to explain. Why atoms are of the order of 10 to, why not 10 times lower, 100 times lower, or why not 100 times bigger? Why is this particular size, characteristic size? Of course, there is a difference between heavy atoms, small, it doesn't matter. But the atomic scale is 10 to the power minus 10. Why is it of this scale? No answer in classical physics. Why are they spherical? In fact, if you believe in Rutherford model, then they should have pancake shapes, like astronomical orbits. So the analogy with astronomical orbits is quite wrong, because astronomy, the orbits around the sun, planetary orbits, they are planar, whereas atoms are anything but planar objects. They are spherical objects, as far as we know from solid state diffractions and so on. And the other thing, Rutherford's nuclear model, we have already mentioned this, that Rutherford is unstable. Line spectra was impossible to understand. Classical physicists tried a lot, from harmonics and combination of harmonics, and various things were tried, ingenious attempts, but they could not explain hydrogen spectrum and other atomic spectra. But Bohr came along and he did the quantization and he got the thing. So failure of classical physics to account for so many basic features pointed out to the need for a new theory at the atomic scale of matter. So this is a very quick summary. And if you have any questions at this stage, I will good. Otherwise, I'll proceed to the next point, that what were the early attempts. Any questions?
Yes. Yes. Somebody has asked that in both photoelectric effect and Compton effect, a photon collides with an electron, but the photon is absorbed in photoelectric effect, whereas it is scattered in Compton effect. I've always wondered why it is so.
No, it's a very good question. In fact, this question I addressed some student audience only a few months ago. And again, exactly. So it's very interesting, and it shows the importance of physics education research, that these queries are quite universal. They are not just one particular student asking. First of all, you have to understand that when photon collides with an electron, all kinds of things can happen. It can get absorbed. It can, if it's a free electron, it can get scattered. Now, important thing is, photon cannot be absorbed by an electron by energy momentum considerations. Photon plus electron, please go home and do this calculation, gamma plus E going to E. This equation kinematically, if E are free, if E is free, then this is not possible. A free electron cannot absorb an electron. So it will have to scatter. So it is because you cannot satisfy simultaneous energy and momentum conservation for this system. Then how does it happen in photoelectric effect? Photoelectric effect, something which is not said, but which is unwritten, is that the collision is electron plus photon plus lattice, giving rise to electron plus lattice and no photon on the right. Now this is very much possible. This is energy momentum wise very much possible. If you want, I will give in the chat a more detailed explanation, but you can do yourself. That electron plus photon going to electron free, please mark the word free, free electron plus gamma going to electron, not possible. But bound electron plus photon plus lattice, photon can be absorbed. So energy momentum conservation allows this and disallows the earlier thing. So that's the answer to this question. The other important point is that it doesn't mean in photoelectric effect it cannot scatter. We are talking of an experimental setup in which we are talking of the photoelectric effect in which photons are absorbed. But we could have done experiments in which photon is scattering of bound states. I mean, there are experiments on photon scattering of bound atoms and so on. So those processes are possible. So I hope the answer is clear. Any other?
There's a follow-up question, sir. As we know, the photon traveled as wave and interact as particles in photoelectric effect. Why
Yeah.
does this happen?
Oh, very good question. You are asking the question which so far, in a convincing manner, nobody has been able to answer. It is a wave particle duality that during the passage, the current standard answer, which most physicists accept, is when you are not measuring its position, when you are not localizing the photon, it doesn't get localized. And when a certain experiment tries to localize the photon, it gets localized. It's a very strange and sort of crazy answer, but that's the answer in quantum mechanics. That when the experiment setup tries to measure something, tries to localize something, it gets localized. And when the setup has no way to localize an electron or a photon, then it acts like a wave. We'll do this point in a very thorough way in the next lecture under the section on wave particle duality. But it's a very, very normal doubt. And I won't be completely wrong in saying that to an absolutely clear extent, it is wave particle duality is still not understood in physics. So the Copenhagen or the Bohr interpretation that I just told you is not universally accepted, but the very good thing in quantum mechanics is that the quantum mathematical formalism is so accurately verified. So these interpretative issues keep under debate all the time, but it doesn't matter as far as the quantum mechanical applications are concerned. I think that's enough. Next step. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this you already said, but again, maybe repeat. Can photon be absorbed by electron of isolated atom, or it needs to be in lattice only?
No, it can be absorbed by an isolated atom. I said free. Of course, it can be absorbed by an isolated atom because atom will recoil. You see, what happens is that recoil energies, photon can be absorbed. Photon on an atom gets excited, it gets recoiled, and you will be at energy momentum. Both can be satisfied. So there is no problem with atom because atom has a structure. It doesn't have to be a lattice. It's not that it has to be a full large number of atoms. There has to be something to share energy momentum conservation. But photon plus free electron giving rise to free electron, impossible. Yeah, next.
Yeah, I think this question maybe you will answer later, but I'll just read out. How do we physically interpret the quantum concepts like spin, which do not have a classical analog?
Well, that is coming in our lecture 11, orbital angular momentum speed. I would request you to hold on, but just leave it with one point that the spin, intrinsic spin is a very subtle non-classical concept. It is not to be equated. Electron is not to be thought of as a little sphere, little sphere which is rotating about its axis. That's a wrong picture. Electron is a point particle and still has spin. Now, how does it come about? I'll tell you in lecture 11. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can go ahead now.
Yeah. So this will be a very brief section. So early attempts at building a new.
Professor Kumar, let me just tell you that since we lost a little bit of time at the beginning, we can extend this session by about 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I'm sorry, it was my mistake.
No problem. No problem.
So early attempts at building a new theory introduced ad hoc hypothesis of quantization to deal with atomic system. So this whole set of efforts done by Niels Bohr and various collaborators, they were very brilliant set of physicists who did these early attempts, as you can understand. So when there is such an anomalous thing happening, the experimental features are not matching with a very, very established theories. It requires very large number of very creative people to take you out of the problem. So one of the most important people in that group was Niels Bohr, but various other Sommerfeld and a large number of other people were there. And one important general fact, of course, Planck and Einstein should be counted. One important general fact that emerged was that a new constant of nature called Planck's constant H played a central role in the atomic domain. So this came before modern quantum mechanics. People had already seen that there is some funny new constant H which is everywhere there in these, wherever things are failing, this constant is sort of appearing. The same constant appearance, black body radiation. Somebody mentioned black body radiation. You know, the black body radiation laws, ad hocly Planck introduced a constant and said the oscillators are of energy, that's new, etc., etc. Einstein's photoelectric effection also introduced that. Bohr's theory of hydrogen atom again introduced it. It said the angular momentum of hydrogen atom is an integer multiple of h cross. So H was appearing everywhere. De Broglie relation, lambda is equal to H by P. But a consistent framework was, of course, not there. And just for later purpose, you should note that often one uses H cross, which is H by 2 pi. You all know the values of these quantities. Now, Bohr's theory of hydrogen was an outstanding early success. And as I showed you, Bohr's theory was a hybrid theory, a classical theory on which was grafted a quantization principle. It said classical orbits satisfied the usual mv square by r equal to centripetal force, etc., etc. All that stuff, and then onto it there was a quantization. So obviously it was not a conceptually satisfactory theory, but it worked extremely well. It explained hydrogen spectrum, the Balmer lines, etc. And not only that, then people went on introducing relativistic. I'll tell you here, and a feature of quantum, physics research and progress in physics, that you don't get disheartened because the theory is still not complete. See, you try to do as much as possible within a framework, even if you know that framework is not the ultimate framework. So in old theory, they made heroic attempts to try to improve it. So Sommerfeld did a very nice relativistic contribution, and it explained certain things, but could not explain some other thing. Then they tried to apply not only to hydrogen atom, but to even more complex atoms. They generalized the quantization rules of Niels Bohr, etc., etc. So a lot of brilliant work was done. Then Bohr used his famous correspondence principle. Now to go ahead, he didn't have a clear-cut theory in his hand, so he used to guess it by using the correspondence principle. That well, it may be this. Yeah, this is okay because in the limit h cross I'm reproducing classical features. So this is probably fine. So this kind of tentative heuristic arguments, a lot of them were done by Niels Bohr. And they were, as I told you, ingenious attempts. The old quantum theory was not conceptually coherent and could not handle issues like intensity. They did try to do even intensity, but they were not fully successful. And it did not readily, so there was not a clear-cut formalism how to go to complex atom. Each problem was in its own right a different thing to where you try to apply quantization rules, etc. So it was brilliant but ad hoc. And ultimately, of course, it yielded means it was replaced by modern quantum mechanics, which was born around 1925, and it was completed. It is present version. And the key players during this period were Heisenberg, Born, Jordan, Schrödinger, Pauli, Dirac, and a large number of others. It will be unjust to say only these 6 people will. There are a large number of many other people. And of course, we should not forget the very early contributions of Planck and Einstein and Debye, and there were Ernst Fest. There were a large number of other people who were involved in this, and of course de Broglie's wave hypothesis, very bold hypothesis. So it all led to modern quantum mechanics, whose formalism was very different from this old quantum theory, and which we are going to learn in the next few lectures. So with this, I would just like to give you the references. This is actually based on my lecture notes on quantum mechanics that I prepared last, but I could not give the lectures. And the material mainly draws on Schiff is, I must tell you, it is all there in your general information, but Schiff is a classic book. Now, a lot of people don't use it. There are many other good modern books, but it's one of the classic books which sort of taught generations of physicists quantum mechanics. And this is another important book, not very much well known, but it's one of the deepest books on quantum mechanics that you can get for its real fundamental ideas. So those people who are very curious about the fundamentals and very, very critical, I would urge you to read this Gottfried Griffiths is an excellent book, both very practical, very brief, large number of good problems, and a very good book to learn from this, but would not have the rigor of Gottfried and Schiff, but it's excellent, nothing, no question. There's an excellent book by this French set of authors, Cohen Energy. You might know some of these people were Nobel laureates in laser cooling and so on. And true to French standards, it's an excellent, rigorous book in which every little point is explained. That's why it's a thick 2-set volume for undergraduates, and it's supposed to be undergraduates. That's very interesting. It shows the standards of education there, that it's such a thorough book is prescribed at the undergraduate level. And of course, I mentioned some things briefly in classical physics to get a proper, if you have some ideas about queries in classical physics, please do ask. But if you want to have a proper, rigorous description of classical analytical mechanics, Goldstein is one of the books. There are many other books, Fetter and Walechka and many other books which are there. And lastly, I would like to thank Dhaval Dalvi, my colleague at Homi Bhabha Center, for technical help. And as always, Professor Anvesh Majumdar is always there to support and discuss with me various academic matters related to this course. Thank you very much. And I stop there.
Will you take a few more questions? We have a little bit of time.
Questions are welcome. You tell me.
Yeah. So, okay. So, something, following up on the previous discussion of photon-electron interaction.
Yeah.
Somebody has asked that if free electron does not absorb photon, but free atom does, can we use this to conclude that electron has no internal structure?
Yes, very good. I think that's correct. The answer is right.
Okay. Then someone has asked.
But then it goes into the internal, it goes into the excitation. The problem with point electron, structureless electron is there is nothing to go into, there's no excitation energy to absorb the energy. Very good. It's correct answer.
Okay, thank you. There is a question which asks that is there any possible condition where particle can show particle and wave nature simultaneously?
No. It doesn't show simultaneously. In the same setup it shows. So it is known as complementarity principle, that you need what are complementary aspects. Niels Bohr put it. What are complementary aspects in that both, position and momentum are complementary. Both describe the state of a particle in classical physics. What are complementary in classical physics become mutually exclusive in quantum mechanics. That's the way Niels Bohr put complementary principle, which is another way of saying the uncertain principle. No, it is not possible to have the both. That's the meaning of wave particle unity. Sometimes in certain parts of the experimental setup, it will behave like, say, in a particular in a given phenomena, it can't behave like both, like a particle and a wave. Yeah. Anything else?
Okay. Yeah. Someone asked why we can't draw trajectories for quantum particles.
Because a trajectory, a classical phase space trajectory has a position and momentum well defined at every point, which is not possible in quantum mechanics because of the uncertainties. You can't specify a particle's position and momentum at a given time simultaneously in quantum physics. In classical physics, you can. So when somebody is giving you the trajectory of a particle in classical physics, the position you can see from an origin, and the velocity, it's a t is the parameter. What is a trajectory? T is the parameter which determines the trajectory. So dr by dt, you can calculate the slope of that thing and it will give you velocity. So at every point of a particle trajectory, r and v exactly, but that's not possible in quantum physics. So trajectory picture is definitely not possible. Of course, I must say that a kind of diffuse trajectory picture, if you wish, it is possible with a kind of uncertainty. The diffused clouds are possible. And another thing I must say that there is a, I don't know if the student is referring to that. There's an entirely very elegant and very clever way of talking about quantum mechanics. That is Feynman's path integral approach to quantum mechanics. There you talk of path trajectories only, but they are not actual trajectories. And but then it is replaced by you have to sum over all the trajectories and etc. And it's a different formalism. So there you do talk of trajectories, but that trajectory is not the actual trajectory. There are all possible trajectories you have to sum over. And then for the one that is taken, there is a certain action which is stationary, etc. There, I won't go into that formalism. That's a different formalism. No.
Okay.
But if you are talking of physics, not theory, just take it that the usual classical trajectory picture has to be abandoned in quantum physics.
Okay.
Don't worry about theories, but as a physical fact. Yeah.
Yeah, you said that things that are complementary in classical mechanics are mutually exclusive in quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
Could you please explain this in detail?
I've already told you, the particle, a dynamic state in particle physics, X and P are, first of all, don't get confused about the words, So it is best in physics not to worry too much about words, complementary, etc. It is actually just uncertainty. So X and P are complementary things. Both together make the whole description in classical physics. Isn't it? Dynamic state, we said X is not enough, P is not enough. Both are needed. So that's the meaning of complement. You and I complement each other. Means both of our abilities together make the whole thing. So that is the meaning of complement. COMPLE. It's not it's not complements in the sense of greetings, but complement means the other part. So X and P are complements in classical physics, but they are mutually exclusive. You don't know exactly X. If you know exactly X, P is not at all known. And if you know P is exactly, X is not at all known.
Okay.
So another example of, if you want to give other examples, there are numerous examples. The other example is angular momentum and angular coordinate and energy and time. But the very physical example is field strength and the number of particles, the number of photons and electromagnetic field strength. Now I can't explain to you this. This needs quantum, this needs somewhat advanced domains of physics or quantum mechanics. But you take it that electric field strength and number of photons. If the number of photons is exactly known, then the field is not exactly, field amplitude is not exact. If the field amplitude, like in a laser, is known, then the number of photons is not well defined. But this is an advanced thing, and don't bother if you don't understand it. Okay.
Okay. We are almost at the end of time, but just one or two quick questions. Yeah. So how do we come to know that position and momentum are complementary to each other, and why we choose these instead of any other pair of physical quantities?
No, there is a definite answer in quantum mechanics. These X and P's they satisfy a certain formalism, a certain commutation relation. Those in anticipation, we are all going to do this. Those quantities whose operators do not commute, there is uncertainty in them. And those quantities which commute, there is no uncertainty. So it is not that for example, if you can get X and Py, Y component of P and X coordinate of R, they commute and you can determine both simultaneously. So why certain observables are happen, it's a technical answer. Their commutators are non-zero. I think you will learn it as you go along in the formalism. I'm sure you know it since you are at MSc, you have already done these things earlier. Yeah. Yeah, next question.
Okay, I think I'll take the last question, which says that on one slide, it said that one of the limitations of classical mechanics is that it is unable to explain the atomic scale. How does QM explain it?
Yeah, very good. Unable to explain that. Yeah, in fact, this is going to be, yeah, by the way, I forgot to make one statement very important for this. Tutorial 1 that you are going to do, I think tomorrow, which is going to be based on this lecture and tomorrow's lecture. All tutorials are important, but tutorial 1, I wanted to especially emphasize that a lot of things that I have hurried through, photoelectric effect, Compton effect, black body radiation, that actually I did not even mention much, are given in detail in the tutorials. So that is going to use the word complement in the English sense. That is going to fill the gap of this lecture. It gives you a lot of theory also. Those questions are, the question head is longer than the question, and in that question heading, a lot of theory is explained, and then some questions are asked. So please go through those questions yourself, because that's old modern physics. You all have done it in BSc. So the tutors probably will not do those parts, and tutors will do the more relevant parts, which are of direct relevance to the modern quantum mechanics, the de Broglie wavelength and uncertainty principle, etc. But please go through those first 3-4 questions properly. And there's a whole lot of questions, so you should try to do them as many as possible. Some of them are marked important, when the tutorial is released to you, you'll know. So please first try to do those problems, and then try to do all of the remaining problems. So that is about this. Yeah. What was I? Sorry,
So how does QM explain the atomic scale?
The atomic. Yeah. How does QM explain the atomic scale? One easy answer is the uncertainty principle explains it. You see, I asked the question, why can't the electron orbit be 100 times lower? I mean, in gravitational astronomy, there is no such thing that no orbit can be lower than Mercury planet. There is no such thing. I mean, that's just a chance. Mercury orbit has a certain size, but classical physics doesn't prevent any particular size of the orbit. So why does it happen in quantum physics? There is orbit of the size around of the magnitude 10 to the power minus 10 meter. Why is it so? Simple answer, physical answer. Technical answer is, of course, your QM theory will give that size, give it the mean radius of the orbit. But the physical answer is extremely insightful, and that answer is uncertainty principle. If you think the electron is, if you put the electron 100 times lower, that is, say 10 to the power minus 12 meters, you know what will happen? The momentum uncertainty and the momentum of the electron will go so much higher that its kinetic energy cannot be compensated by the increased potential energy. You see, at 100 times lower, you might say, oh, it's even better because potential energy is higher. It's even more bound. Why doesn't the electron go there? 10 to the power minus 12 meter. The answer given by uncertainty principle is, okay, the potential energy is undoubtedly more, so it should be there, but no. The momentum of the electron by uncertainty principle gets much more than the and the kinetic energy becomes, so if it is 100 times lower, potential energy is 100 times better, but the kinetic energy is 10,000 times more. It goes by square, and therefore kinetic energy will just push away the electron from 10 to the power minus 12, which is the reason electron cannot reside in a nucleus. You will see in the tutorial problem. Electron cannot, why can't electron be there in a nucleus? It is, of course, created during beta emission, but it doesn't reside there. It can't reside there for exactly the same reason that electron cannot be at an orbit 100 times lower than the Bohr orbit. So that's the answer. Please do try to understand this answer, both from the tutorial and from what I have said to you. Reflect on this answer, how uncertainty principle and forces the atom the lowest atomic orbit to be of the size that we got. So that's the answer. I hope it is clear to you. And
Okay, thank you, Professor Kumar. I think we will close the session now because we are already over time.
yeah,
So you can write your questions on the chat, and there were many questions on Lagrangian and Hamiltonian, but as Professor Kumar said, that he will answer them later, and those answers will be passed on to you. So,
but that later could be a few days.
yeah, it can. I was just going to say that it could be a few days because he's lecturing every day, so obviously he's busy. So please hold on. I mean, there's still
Yeah.
a lot of time to go. Yeah.
Those post-course, certainly as many questions as I know the answer of will be answered. Post-course, I promise. But
Yeah.
during the course, because of the very tight schedule of tutorials and lectures and so on, and many other interesting lectures I would also like to attend. So it might not be, I'll try to answer a few, but it might not be possible to answer all. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kumar.